This video I'm going to be showing you how to correctly turn a drum on a brake lathe, on a bench brake lathe. The first thing that you probably noticed already is that we have a different cutting head. This cutting head has actually only one cutting tooth on it. That cutting tooth looks like that. You can see it's already a little dirty. You adjust the in and out of your brake lathe when you're cutting drums by this handle back here. When you rotate that, that moves that drum further and closer away from our cutting head. So actually when we're turning drums, we're going to be pushing the drum that way. We're going to be moving the drum away from the cutting head. We only move the cutting head to make our adjustments on how much material we're going to move from the drum. So just like in cutting a rotor, our first step is establishing a 0 point. I'm going to turn the brake lathe on and show you how I find that 0 point. Move that cutting head inside of the brake rotor, listen to me, inside of the brake drum, and then right the same way that we do drums, I'm all over the place, the same way that we do rotors, I'm just going to listen for that scratch. So that was a little bit much. You just barely want to have that cutting head touch the drum. Good enough. Okay, now I'm going to move that cutting head all the way in. And you start cutting a drum at its furthest point. So you start cutting a drum all the way inside of the drum, and then, like I said, the drum is going to move this way, and our cutting head is going to stay in the same position. So at this point, I've established my 0. I make my measurements, make my adjustments and my changes, all down here at this point. So again, this is measured in inches or in millimeters. First thing I'm going to do is lock that head in, and I already have it locked. I'm going to loosen up this wheel. I'm going to move it to inches and 0. I'm going to tighten that thumb screw, and that should keep it pretty well locked in. There's quite a bit of slack in this old lathe. So that's about 0. Now I can loosen up this thumb screw down here, and then I'm going to set it to about 2,000. Lock it in, and then I engage a brake drum. When I'm turning a brake drum, I engage the lathe back here. So I'm actually going to push this direction, and it gets that handle moving, and it gets our cutting head pulling out and away from the drum itself. Alright, so we just finished up our first pass, and that's going to be our fast pass. Okay, I'm going to shut off the brake lathe. I'm going to take a brush. A disadvantage about cutting brake drums is that the dust doesn't always clear itself very well. You can be building up quite a bit of dust inside the drum as you're cutting. That dust really doesn't affect the cut, but it can make a mess, just like everything else. But anyway, next I'm going to move into my slow cut. You have far more variation of speed when you're cutting drums. This dial back here is your speed adjustment for the in and out function of the brake lathe. So you can see I was just cutting on 14 and a half. I'm going to move it down to probably about a 6, and that should get us a fairly reasonable and usable slow cut on this brake drum. So I'm going to do that right now so you can see me do it. So if you see that note, I know it's upside down. You're only supposed to change the speed if the brake lathe is running, and engaged. So So we're at about 6 right now. It's gonna be far slower than what it was on our first cut. So I'm gonna disengage the lathe. Again, that's back here. It's disengaging the lathe. I'm going to feed. Sorry. I'm going to feed my cutting head back in, making a little bit of contact. Okay. I'm going to come back down here. I don't have to touch my thumb screw anymore. I should be where I left off on that last cut, more or less. When these things develop a little bit of slop, it kind of turns into a little bit of a guessing game, but we're pretty close. So I'm gonna loosen that thumb screw again. I'm gonna give it a couple more thousandths. Okay. And then I'm gonna engage the lathe again. Okay, so at this point we just finished up the slow cut on our drum. I'm going to disengage the lathe again, and then I'm actually going to rotate the lathe. I'm going to extend the drum a good distance away from the cutting head. Maybe I can get in there and do something. I'm going to take this brush next. I'm going to run it through there, trying to clear out as much of the old nasty, much of the chips as we can. Clean that out. And now, just like on a brake rotor, you want to use a little bit of sandpaper. Go over that freshly refinished swept area, trying to just get rid of any high points that you might have been left with after cutting the drum. But at this point, that is a fairly nicely cut drum and could be reused on the vehicle.